Good morning. Thank you everyone for joining me today. I'm happy to be here two-dimensionally. I look forward to seeing you all in person again and being greeted by Jim Harper and hearing Paula play the piano and Trisha's purple hair and eating Nora's cookies and lemon squares. It'll be so sweet we can all meet together again at the Aldea. And until then, here we are. So when I was asked to speak today about books, reading, and the work I do promoting reading, I first thought, what can I possibly tell this group of highly educated people, including some authors, about the importance of reading that they don't already know? And what I came up with is that I can share with you about the work I do with Libros para Todos and what I call the 3 superpowers of books. Now, there may be many more superpowers of books that you know about, but today I'm going to talk about the 3 that I know to be true. Before COVID, I led a very busy life. Every hour was mapped out, classes, chores, committees, social engagements. I was very happy, but also very, very busy. And then suddenly everything stopped. No work, no school, no lunch dates. I spent several months at home with my 2 daughters, my father, who had happened to be visiting us and then got stuck in San Miguel, and my partner Mick would visit almost every day. And we no longer set alarm clocks. In fact, we didn't really need clocks. We went on nature walks, we cooked, we slowed down, and we read lots of books. Lots and lots of books. With the kids, we would read Nancy Drew, Famous Five, a lot of the classics, Phantom Tollbooth. And I read more in those first few months of lockdown than I had in the previous several years. Though I was stuck at home, I went to faraway places, different times, and I met a lot of characters. Has it ever happened to you that when you finish a good book, you still have what I call a book hangover, where for several days afterwards, your mind is still in between the pages of that book? You know you've read a good book when you miss the people in the book, like they were your friends. And sometimes I would imagine myself as a character in the story while I was reading it, and I would think about what I would do or say. Last year when I was reading The Fixer by Bernard Malamud, I imagined myself as a prison worker who would sneak treats and words of encouragement to the protagonist, for example. Books are powerful, and this leads us to superpower number 1, empathy. Reading gives us someplace to go when we have to stay where we are. How important has that been for this past year and a half? Our worlds expand. We can vicariously be someone else and to experience a greater range of this humanity than what our everyday lives can sometimes offer. We can be other people, and that in turn develops empathy. Empathy is a tool for building people into groups, for allowing us to function as more than self-obsessed individuals. Though I was anxious about the state of the pandemic, about people getting sick, on a personal level, it was a time of sweetness. Life slowed down, reminded us of the basics, family, love, and to be a human being, not just a human doing. I'm forever grateful for 2020 because it ended up being the last year I spent with my father, who passed away in April of 2021. Those months of lockdown with him, my daughters, and my partner I will cherish forever. Coincidentally, or strangely, when my father passed away to cancer, I was reading Joan Didion's The Year of Magical Thinking. She writes about the death of her husband, John Donne, and eventually her daughter passed away as well. It's very candid and thoughtful reflection about death and grief. Before the death of my father, I really thought grief was just deep sadness. So I was surprised that so many other emotions came over me in the hours, days, weeks, and now months since his departure. I found that Didion shed light on one of the most surprising aspects of grief, that of disbelief. She writes, "Yet I was myself in no way prepared to accept this news as final. There was a level on which I believed that what had happened remained reversible. That was why I needed to be alone. I was thinking as small children think, as if my thoughts or wishes had the power to reverse the narrative." These two excerpts really struck a chord with me because I still feel a degree of disbelief, like he is not really gone, like I could still call him. When I went to the U.S. consular office to file a death certificate, I was asked to submit his passport. And when I watched him punch holes in it, this huge wave of emotion came over me and the thought, but how is he going to travel now? It's absurd, of course. So when I read Didion's experience about losing her husband and the year of magical thinking, which refers to a year of thinking that he isn't really gone, that he could return, it rang true for me. I realized my experience is not unique, and there is comfort in that. I'm not really alone. So many people reached out to me and offered words of condolences. I felt very loved, and yet I experienced grief so deeply, and I felt very alone in my grief. While books had allowed me to leave my quarantine and experience a rich life, now books offered something else to me. Soon after my father's death, I read Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's book called Notes on Grief, about the loss of her father. She writes, "Grief was a celebration of love. Those who could feel real grief were lucky to have loved." And I thought, wow, grief is not just sadness. It is an expression of love. And the fact that I am experiencing deep grief means I have had deep love in my life. And isn't that beautiful? Deep grief comes from deep love. And I'm grateful to have had that deep love in my life. This brings us to superpower number 2. An understanding that we are not ever really alone in our experiences. There is comfort in the shared experience. Since 2015, I have been director of a very small but very active and mighty nonprofit called Libros para Todos. The mission is to inspire children to read and to love reading. We work in mostly rural communities, but also some low-income urban neighborhoods. We work with children ages 4 to 18, but we focus on ages 9 to 12 because that is the age where habits are easily formed. And developing a lifelong habit of reading not only helps them receive superpowers 1 and 2, but also superpower number 3, to be a change maker. The ability to imagine a world differently, a better world. The science fiction writer Neil Gaiman writes, "We all, adults and children, writers and readers, have an obligation to daydream. We have an obligation to imagine. It is easy to pretend that nobody can change anything, that we are in a world in which society is huge and the individual is less than nothing, an atom in a wall, a grain of rice in a rice field. But the truth is, individuals change their world over and over. Individuals make the future, and they do it by imagining that things can be different." Books are tools that sharpen our imagination. They provide creative possibilities, and they give wings to our dreams. This is a power that we want the children of Mexico and the world to have as they face very real challenges, such as poverty, climate change, prejudice, structural inequality. Libros para Todos accomplishes this mission through a variety of different projects. We have a big read event, which I think many people know about, where we find a great book and we distribute it to hundreds of children in different communities. And they have about 6 weeks to read that book, and then we bring the author to visit them. We also host workshops for educators, and we'd like to thank the UU in particular for always supporting that project. And we have 5 mobile libraries that change communities every few months. And there's a creative writing and art summer camp. And we have volunteers that help kids that are falling behind in school by going to work with them one-on-one. During the pandemic, we did food relief for families that had lost their main source of income. We made a podcast, which you can find on Spotify. It's children reading stories that they wrote for other children. It's called Colorín Colorado. And we did a writing competition, a stay-at-home summer camp for 95 children, where we distributed bags with different activities that they could do at home. And although it's hard to measure the impact of our work, we feel greatly encouraged by feedback from some of the kids. After the first day of camp in 2018, one 10-year-old boy told us that it had been the best day of his life. Another kid, an 11-year-old boy from a rough neighborhood of San Miguel, he acted like he thought our summer camp was stupid on the first day, and he made fun of the activities and other kids. And he interrupted and teased, and quite honestly, I found it very difficult, very annoying. But he came back the next day. In fact, he walked by himself to camp, and it wasn't that close. And then he came back the following day, and he wrote a hard story about a family torn apart by drugs. The last day of camp, he gave me a hug. I don't know if that change will survive the challenges he faces in his life, but I know it was a good experience for him, and I hope so. One year, we did a big read event with high school students. Now, I was hesitant because I have always worked with kids. I love kids. Teenagers intimidate me. And when we distributed the book, which was Reina Grande's book, I think, maybe you remember, one of the adolescents told us flatly not to bother, that they weren't going to read it. I felt so hopeless, but our team kept at it. And when we returned 6 weeks later, those same teenagers embraced Reina. They gave her the stories that they had written, and with tears in their eyes said, "Your book meant so much to me. Thank you." That day was probably the best day of work I have had with Libros para Todos in the 6 years I've been director and in the 8 years that I've been part of the organization. We need to work harder now than ever before. The pandemic is further exacerbating the gap between socioeconomic groups. The dropout rate at low-income schools has increased due to lack of connectivity and the loss of income to those families. While upper-income families easily can do online schooling, tutors, summer camps, etc., lower-income families do not have those same opportunities. And the truth is that I'm very worried that Mexico will become further polarized. It is not acceptable that children have such starkly different opportunities. I want to thank the UU congregation for always believing in this project, in education, and in supporting the community. You know that not everything is as pristine and beautiful as it is in Central. There is a different reality just 10 minutes away. I invite you to familiarize yourself with that reality if you haven't already. Volunteer. Write to me. Join us. And before I conclude, I ask you, can you remember the first book that moved you? The first book that made you cry? The book that you couldn't put down? The book that sparked a love of reading in you or gave you a big book hangover? We want children everywhere to have those experiences. We want them to feel the superpowers of books. Children are curious and creative by nature. It is our job to keep that curiosity alive. We must keep reading to children even after they learn how to read for themselves. We must make sure that there are books in their schools, in their homes, and libraries close by. And in closing, I just want to share one of my favorite quotes with you that feels very relevant at this time. Let us pick up our books and our pens. They are the most powerful weapons. Thank you so much.